Hey, you made it. You made it back to the show. It's the show where we go very fast and then very slow. It's the show where we will go and you will know when it's time to go to the show. Hey, it's Sonic Weekly. We talk about Sonic the Hedgehog once every 7 days or so and associated various interests as well. You may have heard last week we got deep with Danny Fernandez on Dragon Ball. We're going to talk about Garfield this week. Next week is going to be when we're going to do the Sonic birthday episode with Cybershell. Cybershell's coming back. So look forward to that. This has been the Sonic Weekly Direct. This is Direct season, so we thought we would do a Direct as well. We know who's coming up next week. We don't often know what's coming up beyond that. We know it's a great show. My name is Grant. Let's meet everybody who's with me. Grant, it's Bo. Hi, Bo, the senior. I'm sorry, your title now is President of all Sega Saturn Discourse Online.
Here we go, buddy. Yeah, election was a squeaker, but we pulled it out. I want to thank everybody who came out to vote.
Well, thank you for doing your service, Smoovies. And then also the star of the show, Out of the Shadows into the Spotlight. It's David the Lurker. Hi, David.
Oh, hi, Grant. Hi, Bo. Yeah. Sonic's birthday, we'll celebrate it next week because nobody knows when he was born. I think it's because he was born in a forest because he's a hedgehog. And they don't keep records out there. I don't even know when. Wait, I guess I do know when I was born. But I wasn't born in a forest. I was born in a hospital. I was born on the 3rd floor.
Well, the 23rd, as it is, happens to be on a Sunday, which is often when our episodes release, usually during the weekend or on Monday, depending when, Smoovies, there's various factors. We don't need to bore you with the details.
Right. So this will come out on Sonic's official birthday, even though we're saying we're not talking about Sonic's birthday.
I'm saying if you want to talk about Sonic's birthday, you should know that the 23rd his real birthday, David?
No, it's not.
It's not. So it's
the
a lie.
11th.
What are we talking about?
It's a big lie.
Yeah. So it's his birthday month.
Right.
We're going to talk about it.
Yeah, it's like how, Sega doesn't know when Sonic the Hedgehog was released, just like for the longest time we didn't know when Garfield actually started. That ties in.
What a great segue. What a great segue. Sonic the Hedgehog and Garfield have a long, beautiful history together, including the one time where they were the Sonic and Garfield collection released on PC. Is that what it's called? Sonic and Garfield collection?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And which contained the games Sonic and Knuckles, pack. Sonic 3 and Knuckles, Sonic 3, and Blue Spheres. And then also Garfield Caught in the Act. And then also a third game.
A third game, which I didn't realize there was a third game until this morning.
See, I found a demo disc in my basement like last year with Sonic CD, Garfield Caught in the Act, Bug. They were just throwing all of their PC titles on whatever disc they could get.
Well, the point is we're not going to talk about it, but we did want to establish that we know about it. And so let's introduce our guest. You know him from the headline of the podcast that you're listening to. He's an Emmy-nominated comedian. He's won awards as well, a Webby, were we just learning? He's a TV writer, enrolled Cowlitz Indian tribal member, and a Garfield fanatic. It's our friend Joey Clift. Hi, Joey.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. I got to say, big shout out, happy birthday to Garfield. His birthday was on June 19th. That's right, Juneteenth. That's a real fact.
What?
His birthday was yesterday on the day of us recording. His 46th birthday, everybody. So big ups, happy birthday to the Garfield. My connection when you originally reached out to me about how Garfield and Sonic relate to each other, I vaguely was aware of these game packs. But I think that where I know Garfield and Sonic being connected is just the sheer amount of fan art on the internet of Garfield standing next to a pregnant Sonic the Hedgehog holding a baby that's a combination of both of them, implying that they have fucked.
Yes, and sometimes it's Shrek. Sometimes they have a Shrek baby, Sonic and Garfield.
And from our last episode, I heard it was Goku too. Yeah.
Goku is involved. It's a polycule, but
love is beautiful. I'm just saying.
It sure is.
Yeah, Where are we going next week? Like, this is going to be a trilogy, right? Of all
of things Sonic has fucked.
Yeah.
Sonic's fucked a lot of things. I don't know.
Yeah, gotta go fast.
Right. He doesn't even know. It's
So, question. You said that this is your scheduled time every week to talk about Sonic the Hedgehog. Do you ever break the rules and talk about Sonic in times that are not when you're recording this podcast? Also,
Yes.
how often do you think about Sonic the Hedgehog?
Yeah. Okay. So like imagine like a diagram of the brain where it's like kind of a pie chart, but it's not like really a perfect circle because the brain's like not really a perfect circle, but like, a fraction of it is, colored blue to indicate Sonic. For me, it's a lot of blue. It's really a lot of blue.
Yeah, there's not it's close to it's 99.9%. We can't say it's a perfect 100% because we haven't mapped the full human brain, I think. Is that true? We only use like 99.9% of our brain.
Right. Most people, they only use like 10% of your brain. And for us, the other part is just all Sonic stuff.
What percentage of your brain is spent thinking about Big the cat?
Okay, so in that fraction, like half. Like you just cut it in half.
Do we feel like Big the Cat and Sonic would be, or Big the Cat and Garfield would be friends? Because I feel like they're both cats that clearly like love them some eating,
But Garfield's a rude dude, right? He doesn't have patience for Big's pretty stupid. He's like kind of
Big is Forrest Gump, though, right?
He's Forrest Gump. There you go.
Yeah.
I think that Garfield, I don't think that he's a rude dude because everything that you think that he says in the comics are actually his thoughts. Like he doesn't actually say it. So I think that he's a polite dude that really keeps a lot of that stuff to himself.
Okay.
But if he could talk, oh yeah, he'd be rude.
Yeah. Joey, so you have kind of come to become a Garfield fan and voice on Garfield almost in the same way that Bo has done so for Burning Rangers and Sonic Jam, which I also want to make some room for before we dive deep into your specifics with Garfield, in the sense that they both started semi-ironically and then not totally ironically, but like with a tinge of removal and then a further embrace, which you talk about in your Salon article, which is linked in the description, which we'll talk about more too. But first of all, would you guys agree that's true? And then second, we're recording this on the day of Sonic Jam's birthday. Speaking of birthdays, it's all happening in June. And Bo, on the Rings of Saturn blog, you've cracked the code.
Yeah, well, maybe we can tie this back into Garfield here in a moment.
All of it happened on a Monday.
So Sonic Jam came out on June 20th, 1997. But before that, if you were a Japanese consumer and you had access to the Flash Sega Saturn series of demo discs, you had an early preview of Sonic Jam where you could play a little bit of Sonic 1, a little bit of Sonic 2, and 1 minute, 60 seconds of Sonic World, the 3D space that you have in Sonic Jam. And that was your little teaser to this upcoming game. So for a long time, people have noticed about this demo disc that, a little bit is different from what finally came out in the game in June. And, the objects are in different places. There's like springs where the other things should be and yada, yada, yada. But what I found is that you can like patch the game to get rid of the 1 minute limit, and you can put all the missions back in and you can play it as though it were the real game.
What?
And there's some more stuff. And so you can see they were thinking about like different ways of positioning like where the mission panel was and the giant ring. And like, this is all very minor if you're not like into like prototype games and like obsessive documenting of differences of stuff, but like the Sonic fandom or a subsection of the Sonic fandom is really into that stuff. Like you can find people who are analyzing like pixel by pixel differences of like different sprites and different editions of games. And that's been going on for a very long time. And in that tradition, I have patched Demo Sonic Jam to let you play more of Demo Sonic Jam and see some exceedingly minor differences.
So say that back to me again. So the entire Sonic Jam game is hidden within this demo of Sonic Jam.
Yeah, the entire new part of it anyway. So Sonic Jam is a collection of the 4 first Sonic games, depending on how you count. And this new part, which it's kind of like I'm sorry we don't have a 3D game. It's 1997. We have no excuse for not having a 3D Sonic yet. But here's a piece of what we do have. And at the time in the 90s, we were like very happy to get it. And so this is that whole new piece.
So to take it back to Garfield, I similarly was recently gifted a hacked copy of Streets of Rage, the Genesis beat 'em up that has been retitled Streets of Rage with Garfield, where Garfield has been hacked in as a playable character.
That's fantastic. Well, what I was going to ask is, like, when, if it has happened, did the Garfield fandom start looking backward? So Sonic Jam comes out in 1997. The first Sonic game came out in 1991. And by 6 years in, we're already nostalgic for like the old days. It's like, when did that happen for Garfield?
So that's so interesting with Sonic Jam. I mean, I very clearly remember that coming out and it really feeling like a little bit of, sort of a cash in on Mario 64 of like, Mario 64 getting so much positive cred and people really feeling like, oh, this is the future of gaming. And, like Sonic Adventure was like probably not fully developed yet. And Sonic Jam kind of feeling like Sega trying to show what Sonic would look like in a 3D world and just being really, I don't know, just really cool. Like I hung out in like old video game stores like when I was a kid. And I remember like just playing all this stuff and it being great. So the Garfield fandom, Garfield recently celebrated his 46th birthday. And so that would put his creation at, sometime in the 1970s. I think 1978, I want to say.
Math checks out.
Yeah. And I was not alive then, so I do not know if there was a 3D Garfield cartridge that came out in 1984. If there was, please, for the love of God, send it to me. I would die to play that. So I think that the Garfield fandom is very similar to Garfield as a creature in that it moves very slowly. So for, several years, it was primarily just the comic strip. And then they started releasing TV specials in the early 80s. Most notably, there was this really great Garfield TV special called Here Comes Garfield that has this amazing soundtrack you can listen to on Spotify, sung by like Lou Rawls, which is honestly just this like epic musical about Garfield and Odie, like just having fun. There is this song on there called Foolin' Around that I think is implying that Garfield and Odie fuck. But
what?
Because it's just like
this is on Spotify.
Yeah. Because it's like Lorenzo Music saying like, "Hey Odie, you want to fool around?" And then it's like, and then it's just a lot of things that could be like construed as sex talk.
They knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
Entendre adjacent.
Yeah, Jim Davis, you horn dog. And then, I think that the Garfield suction cup, like that a lot of us know about, that, a lot of our maybe families had on the back of their car windshields and stuff like that, or, the back windows of our cars. That was released in sometime in the mid to late 80s. And I feel like you could probably look at that as nostalgia of like, sort of a nod to this character that was in popular culture and everybody sort of knew and appreciated. And something that I really appreciate about Garfield is that was like in the mid to late 80s, and Garfield has been around for 30 some years since then.
Yeah.
So it's like now it's kind of twisted and perverted into not just, big collections of all the Garfield, comics. Like my go point in talking about like, power packs and different collection of games for Garfield, my end point was like when I was a kid, my mom bought me like a Fat Cat 3-pack, which was like a pack of 3 Garfield books. And that kind of in one book. And that's the sort of thing that like you only produce that if you're like cashing in on the nostalgia of this character, right? And that was probably sometime in like the, like late 80s, early 90s or something.
Yeah.
So, and that to me is like kind of interesting in that I think that there's like a couple of different sects of Garfield fans. And it's like, I think that the first sect are people that, discovered Garfield when, in the 70s when they were kids, and now they kind of holds a place of nostalgia. And then I think there's people like me that discovered him like, probably 10, 15, 20 years into his run. And now I'm looking at him through like meme sensibilities. So what I love is like, things like Garfield Game Boy, which is a video that reimagines Garfield as a Game Boy horror villain, like sort of if there was a Friday the 13th Game Boy game, but Garfield instead of Jason, it's kind of like that vibe. Or things like Lasagna Cat, which is a series of just like super weird Garfield videos that it's like a 90-minute fake interview with Jim Davis where he commits suicide at the end or whatever, or like things like like Garfield minus Garfield, where Garfield's kind of erased from the timeline. Or I mentioned just like Garfield and Sonic are having babies or something, And then I think that the third sect of Garfield fans are like kids that are discovering Garfield now through things like the Garfield movie. And it's like, I don't know, it is just like beautiful that you can have this character that I feel like means so many different things to so many different groups of people over the span of like the nearly 50 years of Garfield being a thing,
That you answered some of the questions I had, because I, for some reason, just really interested by this. So one of them was, all right, what's Garfield got going on in the music department? So like one weird thing about Sonic is that even the bad games have just banging soundtracks.
Yeah, like Michael Jackson did the soundtrack to Sonic 3.
Yeah, there's some great Michael Jackson adjacent tunes with Sonic. But there's just so much good stuff. Like for a free upgrade to one of the recent games, the composer put out 46 new tracks.
Wow.
And just released that as an album. And came out of a lair filled with cocaine, I presume. But what's Garfield
was
got?
Just screaming like, "Gotta go fast! Gotta go fast!" He did so much cocaine that he rolled up into a ball and started spinning around the room.
Garfield has some good music. Lorenzo music.
Yeah. That's honestly, I love that joke. It's very good. Lorenzo music. That's my Garfield. Like he's truly the perfect Garfield voice. He's the guy that voiced Garfield in the Garfield and Friends cartoons, and he was a big sitcom actor in the 70s and I think 60s. And
he was like a voice of a neighbor on Laverne and Shirley.
Yeah, for sure. And he I think had a charting hit where he sang in character as that character, because the character they played in Laverne and Shirley was like a doorman or something like that.
Yes.
And I believe the song that he and his catchphrase was just like, I forget what it was exactly, but it was something to the effect of just like, "I got a package for you," or whatever, or like, "The door's for you," or whatever a doorman would say. And he released like a novelty song in character that like made it onto the Billboard charts or something.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, maybe you don't know, but like the voice actor for Dr. Robotnik in the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon is named David. What's his name? I'm
Long John Baldry.
Yes, Long John Baldry.
Yes, who's also a musician who also charted and had big hits and stuff, and did other things besides voicing cartoon characters we love. But you know what I'm wondering in terms of like, because the Garfield that dances on the fence with the top hat has friends, Garfield and Friends. That's definitely the Garfield that I grew up watching, because those aired for whatever reason at the time when I was like getting ready for school in the morning or something. So it would just sort of, or maybe that was it weekdays or weekends? It was on
all the time.
It was syndicated. Like by the time we were growing up, it was syndicated, but it was still airing, I think, on CBS Saturday mornings.
Right.
Because okay. Yeah, you did feel pretty
right, because I know there were three theme songs to that show.
I was like in my 30s when I learned that. I'm like, no, this is the true one. All these others are imposter theme songs.
Well, because I think the second one is what
the fuck
existed in syndication.
Garfield and Friends.
Yeah, that's the second one. Yeah, because the first one is that is the second one. The first one is oh no, why can't I think of it? Mr. Garfield. You know the first one, right?
Wait, what was the first one? What was that?
The first Garfield and Friends theme song.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Friends
Yeah. And then like the USA would push in and sing half of it, and then they'd push back and forth and fight.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there's the third one, which is I don't know how to describe it. It's not a rap necessarily, but
yeah.
Is it avant-garde German experimental electronica?
Well, it's like it goes, he's fat and he's lazy, and then I don't remember the rest, but it's terrible. So
he's fat and he's lazy. He sleeps and he's so crazy. He's funky, he's groovy, he's grumpy, he's moody. He's my main cat, Garfield.
Your you're talking about my personal. If I was a pro wrestler, that'd be my entrance music.
It would be the
yeah. He's fat. He's lazy. So Garfield centric music. I definitely think that Sonic is probably going to beat Garfield in that category in terms of just sheer volume. Sonic starting as a video game. Video games have soundtracks. Garfield starts as a comic strip. Comic strips don't have soundtracks, unfortunately. But the Here Comes Garfield series, like it feels like it's like a Broadway musical that Jim Davis pitched that didn't sell, so they turned it into a cartoon. Like it's a pretty complete musical. It's like an hour-long album with a lot of fantastic singers and fantastic performances. And honestly, the title track, Here Comes Garfield, is like a banger. It just like rules. It's
this
just
is
like
news to me. I'm very excited to check this out.
Yeah,
is there
it's
a Garfield musical, like a proper one? Peanuts has a musical.
There is. If there's not, then like I gotta go. I gotta write something real fast. And also learn how to play piano. Shit.
Do you think are there Garfield fans that feel like the movies, the Bill Murray movies, like cannot be beaten? Like they're like those are my Garfield movies. Like there must be.
This was
right?
one of
like,
my questions too. Yeah,
somebody who like grew up at like the right time, not us, but a younger, dumber person.
So I'm excited to talk about this. I am definitely a Bill Murray Garfield movie denier. I think that's the big steal to me. So actually, I joke, but the reason for that is now to go into the logic. I'm really excited about this. Is that so Lorenzo Music voiced Garfield in the Garfield and Friends TV series up until the early 90s. And then Lorenzo Music's next job was voicing, I believe, Peter Venkman, Bill Murray's character in the real Ghostbusters TV show. He did that for the first season or two, and then Bill Murray personally requested that Lorenzo Music be replaced because he thought that Lorenzo Music was doing too good of a job impersonating Bill Murray's voice. Wow. And then fast forward to like 5, 6, 7, 8 years later when they're making the Garfield movie, Bill Murray lobbies hard for that to take Lorenzo Music's job as voicing Garfield, where Bill Murray basically just did a Lorenzo Music impersonation.
He really has it in for him. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And were they like both traveling in like 70s famous guys in New York or LA, and then because Bill Murray was like a little like hothead. He threw punches famously at Chevy Chase behind the scenes of SNL. So maybe he
did Lorenzo steal Bill Murray's?
Maybe he pissed in Lorenzo.
And look, I don't mean to get conspiratorial. Lorenzo Music died in 2001 very tragically, and the Garfield movie was released in 2004. So I can only assume that Lorenzo Music found out that Bill Murray was taking this role from him and died of grief. So I think Bill Murray killed Lorenzo Music.
I was like, do we know? Wow. Can we account for Murray's whereabouts at the time?
Look, I'm just saying, I think it was a murder. I think Bill Murray is guilty. And
we're just asking questions in a declarative way.
Yeah. Allegedly. Bill Murray's lawyers, get out of here. But other than that, honestly, so I'm really excited to talk about this as it relates to the new Garfield movie, is that I feel like the Bill Murray Garfield movies to me were like made by people that don't care about Garfield. Like it didn't, and you even hear that like, in Bill Murray's interviews afterwards, where he's saying like the only reason that he said yes to it is that he thought it was a Coen Brothers movie because it was written by a guy whose last name was Cohen, and he thought it was a Coen Brothers movie. Which to me, I think that that's a story that that he basically just started telling people because he felt like shamed. He felt ashamed to say that he was trying to take Garfield money. Like I think that's him trying to like get the big payday while also trying not to get the any sort of career soliment that he thought he would get from voicing Garfield. And something that I love about the new Garfield movie is that it's so clear everybody working on that movie fucking loves Garfield. Like it's to the point where there's like, if you haven't seen it, there's moments in the Garfield movie where like Garfield will like trip over something and fall or whatever. And literally his like fall animation and the pose that he would land in is straight out of a 1970s Garfield comic strip.
Oh, that's amazing.
A character gets like frustrated halfway through the movie And as their exclamation of frustration, they say, Jiminy Davis. Like, it's just like beautiful. Like, and it's just the sort of thing where it's like, to see the two Bill Murray Garfield movies really kind of come at it with this feeling of like, I think that the costume designers loved Garfield because they tried to get really close to like, the suit that John Arbuckle wears when he's going on dates and things like that. But other than that, it just doesn't really feel like anybody working on that movie like was excited to be making a Garfield movie. Whereas the current movie, it feels like, Chris Pratt, like, it's annoying that he's voicing Garfield. Sure, why not? But I feel like Chris Pratt was stoked to be voicing Garfield. I feel like everybody in that movie was like excited to be making a Garfield movie. And, there's something like cool about that. And that enthusiasm really translates through the screen in a way that they just don't in the Bill Murray Garfield movies, because he killed Lorenzo Music and was guilty. Allegedly.
Right. Oh, okay. So that's really interesting that, like, okay, there's a generation of fans who are bringing their enthusiasm to it. Because, like, we kind of have that with the Sonic movies. Like, the writer or co-writer of the latest set of Sonic movies, he's been on the show, knows his stuff.
Right.
His pitch was
Ben Schwartz probably has a Garfield or has a Sonic the Hedgehog tattoo.
Right. He played Sonic.
Do you have a Garfield tattoo?
Well, the story talks about a Garfield tattoo.
It's
a long story. Yeah, not your own, right? But the other people's.
Oh yeah. Wait, should I get into it?
Tell the story.
Okay. No, let's bury. I know this is my secret. Yeah. So as mentioned earlier, I wrote an op-ed about Garfield for Salon.com. It's called "How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Garfield," and the subheadline is "What a Late Night Standoff at Motel 6 Taught Me About Life, Comedy, and the Famous Lazy Orange Cat." And yes, those things are connected. So as you've probably gathered, I'm a big fan of Garfield. I love that orange Monday hating cat. And to celebrate the new Garfield movie coming out, my girlfriend and I planned a weekend to do all the Garfield brand tie-in things. So like Olive Garden had a brand tie-in with Garfield where there was like Garfield themed lasagna. We like plan an evening to like eat that for dinner. See the Garfield movie in theaters, like dressed as John Arbuckle and Garfield. I was dressed as John. My girlfriend very kindly was along for the ride, dressed as Garfield the next morning. And on the night between, Motel 6 has a brand tie-in where in 10 Motel 6s around the country, they have a Garfield suite, which is a hotel room completely decked out in Garfield merchandise, like orange curtains, random, like Garfield, like figures on the walls, Garfield stuffed animals everywhere, like the towels and toilet paper are orange. It's this really fun brand tie-in.
The toilet paper?
Yeah, the toilet paper is orange. And, I love Motel 6, but the toilet paper, the orange toilet paper, very low quality. I would not recommend working with that. The only Motel 6 that you could book a Garfield room at in Los Angeles was at the Motel 6 near LAX, which is, kind of like, it's just near an airport. So it's like a little bit of a seedier area of town. And so we rolled up to this Motel 6, wearing very elaborate Garfield t-shirts at 10:30 p.m. at night on a Saturday. We walked in the door. The people who worked there were just like, "Oh, you guys look like real big Garfield fans." And then we were like, "Yep, sure are." And then like,
what gave it away?
Yeah. I think we had like suitcases with Garfield on them. We were just very decked out in Garfield stuff. And then we went to sign into our room. I scanned my credit card. They turned around the thing to sign my name to officially sign in. And then right as the pen was about to touch the pen was about to touch the virtual paper thing that you sign, they flipped it around, and I heard somebody say, "Wait, we double booked the Garfield room." And then I turned to my right, and 2 cash registers over, saw somebody just decked out in Garfield tattoos. And it's clear that not only did they double book the room, but both people who showed up for the Garfield room showed up at the same time to check in. So it was just this like amazing standoff for like 30 minutes of like, us kind of like basically trying really hard to not use our "we want to speak to the manager" voices. But like also both of us having like valid reservations for this, hotel suite in this Motel 6. And, and my girlfriend, who's very sweet, said things like they tried to give us the room on a Monday because that was the only day that was available. And my girlfriend said very sweetly, you don't understand. Garfield hates Mondays. And the person at the Motel 6 was like, oh yeah, you're right. So I guess that just won't work. Like, you know. And you know, it kind of escalated, and we sort of felt like we would be bummed out to not be able to stay in the suite, but the other person, it felt like they would be like devastated. So, you know, seeing that, you know, and sort of, you know, understanding like how happy Garfield is made, you know, me and my life, we like sort of acquiesced the room if they would give us like 5 minutes in the room to just like take some selfies and stuff like that. And afterwards, we, you know, they agreed to that. Afterwards, we, you know, posted these selfies online. I posted just kind of like a little Twitter thread story about it. And, you know, it kind of blew up. It got like the story got featured by like, I don't know, the Wall Street Journal, like Thrillist, like, I don't know, it got a ton of retweets and views. I think it's got like 1 million views on Twitter or something. And while this is happening, Motel 6 reached back out to my girlfriend and I, and, you know, just were very apologetic and very understanding. And they offered us an all expense paid stay in the only Garfield suite in the country with an immersive experience at the Garfield Motel 6 in Hollywood. And we stayed there a weekend or two ago. And while I was in this room, I wrote this op-ed about like, you know, sort of my experience with Garfield and how much I love the character, and, you know, also kind of weaving in this story and stuff. And it was very fun. I hope that anybody reads it thinks I'm a maniac.
It's a great story. I mean, it honestly kind of turns out better that you have this standoff. And like probably you guys should be having like brunch with the other couple, right? Like, who else can you connect with on this same level?
Oh, well, I think that was the issue too, is that it was not another couple. It was one solitary person who booked the room alone for 2 days. And we were like, it was like, we like,
okay,
they
fair.
seemed nice, but it was also just like, we'd like, we'd be fine if we didn't get the room.
Sure.
There's
one guy with lone Garfield. He's a musician. Don't worry about the case. He's just gonna play guitar for a while. It's not a machine gun.
Yeah, it felt like we wanted the room. It felt like they needed the room.
Okay, I think you did the right thing then.
Yeah. But it was just so funny. It was something that like while we were going through it, while we were in this hotel lobby, you know, I was like a little bit annoyed to like, you know, kind of be going back and forth, you know, until literally midnight on a Saturday night for like a Garfield hotel room at a Motel 6 near LAX. But I was also like, this is hilarious. This rules. Like,
this is great. Yeah.
It's like also like the world where if we were 5% different people, there's definitely a world where somebody gets stabbed over this Garfield themed hotel room that looks like the room from the Garfield house sketch. And I think you should leave, you know?
You might have Garfield themed cutlery on them. You see the Garfield knife, you're like, wow, that's great. It's like, yeah, I use it to cut lasagna, and now I'm going to use it to cut you.
Yeah, well, I mean, this person definitely did have tattoos on their knuckles that said "Hate Mondays."
Oh my god!
Yeah, no, not really. I wish.
They had extra fingers.
Yeah. That extra fingers.
Yeah. Did those tattoos inspire you at all? Are you thinking about, you know, tatting up with the orange tabby? Wait, is he? What kind of species of cat is Garfield?
I think he's popularly thought of as a tabby cat.
Yeah.
I have a Knuckles tattoo story that I'm going to tell at another time. Let's put a pin in that, but don't let me forget it. Like in the next couple of weeks.
So I do not have a Garfield tattoo, but the Motel 6 treated us really well when they gave us sort of the additional suite. It was they covered it. They gave us like a gift bag. Oh, I love this detail. They gave us like when we came into the room, like the general manager of the location like escorted us in, and they showed us like a gift bag that they got us that had a handwritten apology note from Garfield.
That's amazing.
And I'm like, fine.
Garfield.
Yeah, it's canonically, I read it. Well, it was from Garfield and the Motel 6 team, but it was like reading it, I was just like, I didn't know it, but I've always wanted Garfield to personally apologize to me.
It should have drawn like a thought bubble around it. That would have been.
Oh yeah, for sure. But so they treated us really well, and because it was right off the Walk of Fame, we were walking around Hollywood a lot, and my girlfriend and I passed a henna tattoo stand, and I, for a brief moment, was like, I kind of want to get a Garfield henna face tattoo, and I didn't, but I came they were closed by the time we walked to an Italian restaurant and had lasagna, and when we were walking back, I was like, was like, oh, they're closed, but I woulda.
Yeah, it would have been very good punctuation on the whole like thing of it. But man,
What a story, Mark.
what a crazy story! What an amazing thing! And also, doesn't it just feel good to just release yourself, fall back into the marketing of a brand, the comforting big arms of a brand that just has lots of tie-ins and lots of stuff for you to consume and just not think about anything else. You're just like, I'm going to go from the Garfield this to the Garfield that. I say this because I'm thinking about maybe attending. There's a Sonic fan convention in Carson, California, 2 weekends from now. And
yeah, you should go.
Some of our previous guests have been, that one. Have been, and I'm like, I could go. Do I want to go? And then I also am thinking about, I don't have any tattoos. What would I get a tattoo of? Why don't I have a Sonic tattoo? Maybe I should.
You should get a Garfield tattoo.
Yeah, maybe I'll get a Garfield tattoo.
Well, you could get the one of the images of Sonic and Garfield,
one
or
of the
Sonic's
DeviantArts.
pregnant.
Yeah, I would just get that just right on the neck.
Okay, so you mentioned something I'm also interested in, which is like your article talks about like, oh, you had this kind of period where you turned away from Garfield, or at least like outwardly you've turned away from Garfield, and like at least Grant and I also had this period with Sonic. Is like, I don't know if this is for me anymore. Like this game was bad, and the follow-up game also bad, and the follow-up to that, oh boy, that was really bad.
Yeah,
and just I spent like 15 years not having 90% of my brain on Sonic, but then I came back.
I like to think about it for me as like Garfield Rumspringa, where it's just like if you're Amish, you leave and you go into the city for a year or two, you come back. So a couple of things. There is also a Garfield fan convention that happens every other year. It's called the Gathering of Garfields, like the Gathering of Juggalos, but for Garfield. And it's primarily, I think, older Garfield fans collecting memorabilia. I've not been to it, but I desperately want to go. I don't know. I think Grant, you got to go to it. You host a Sonic podcast. You'll be a celeb there.
You should wear like a fedora with a press pass in the band. Like, I'm here to cover this the convention for the podcast.
Bo, what you were saying. I think that for me, Garfield was a character that I really loved growing up and felt like a very, looking back on it as like a comedy writer, it's like he feels like a formative comedy influence for me. But while I was a kid, it's like, when you're 10, you don't necessarily love the things that you loved when you're 6 or whatever. So, I think that I mentioned this in the article, but my, taste just kind of shifted a little bit more toward alt comedy stuff, things like The Far Side and like, The Simpsons, Late Night with Conan O'Brien and stuff like that. And, it just kind of became something where when I was, in my 20s in Los Angeles in the LA comedy scene, where Garfield was just like a fun thing to meme, like, and it's sort of like the way that I think about it is if you create Garfield memes, if you draw, like just a beautiful photo of Garfield and Sonic, making love and having a baby, that is still coming from a place of love for those characters. It's just through the ironic lens of being in your 20s or whatever, And I think that now that I'm, like no longer in my 20s, it's like I can look at that stuff as, when you're in your teens and 20s, you rebel against the stuff that you liked when you were a kid. But then I think that when you enter into your 30s and 40s, you're like, no, that was like cool and fun. And I like that. And like, who am I? I'm not trying to prove anything to anybody as far as like me liking or not liking something from when I was a kid. Like I mentioned in the article that a lot of people gift me Garfield stuff because they just know me as a Garfield fan. And I think that originally when that happened, I kind of thought it was like funny and like everybody, it was just sort of a continuation of the ironic, Garfield love. And now when I get like, when somebody gives me something Garfield related, I'm like, oh, that's like thoughtful and nice. And like, I love I have like a random collection of just like Garfield things, like on that shelf behind me. That's like, they're just like fun gifts from people. And it's just like Garfield, I think, is how people express their love and appreciation for me. And that's like beautiful, Do y'all feel that way with Sonic?
Absolutely. Like when Idris Elba was cast in the Sonic movie, like people texted me to congratulate me. Like, oh my gosh, you guys got it.
You're
like,
Idris Elba, right?
I'm happy for you that your franchise has Idris Elba.
Yeah, when Chris Pratt got cast as Garfield, I got a lot of just like thoughts, like a lot of like those kinds of texts.
Nobody outright like saying like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, dude." I just being like, "All right, what do you think?"
Yeah, it's like gotta get your take.
Okay, so I have to say I don't like it. You're supposed to mean
Look, at least he
being
didn't.
mad at people trying to be thoughtful.
At least he didn't murder Alenzo Music, allegedly.
Well, I mean, where was Chris Pratt on the day of Lorenzo Music's death? Was he hanging out with Bill Murray? Was he forced to be an accomplice? And you don't
forced to be? Yeah, I mean, I guess that.
I mean, I feel like Bill Murray would do that, right? Where he's right, where Bill Murray is just like, "Oh, hello, Chris Pratt. I'm sure you're a child at this point or a teenager," and he's like, "Oh, hi, Mr. Murray. How's it going?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm just murdering someone today." And he's like, "What?" Yeah, he's like, "Can't tell anyone. They won't believe you."
He's also like, "I can't tell you apart. You guys sound so similar."
No, I didn't know Chris Pratt
who do I arrest?
Chris Pratt. Guess how old Chris Pratt is. Chris Pratt is without googling it.
Oh God,
44.
He's got to be in his 40s, right?
Okay, yeah, that's spot on. He's 44. Yeah,
It's because Grant's actually Chris Pratt, just like Bo is actually Idris Elba.
Right.
Yes,
and I'm the Bill Murray, and there's blood on my hands.
Allegedly.
You could be Lorenzo Music. You faked your death, letting Bill Murray think he got away with it.
God, if Lorenzo Music was still alive, I would cast that guy in literally everything that I wrote. Even if it didn't make sense, I'd just be like, and Lorenzo Music will voice the baby or something.
He could have been Boss.
Can't just have a narrator.
Yeah.
Boss Baby.
He could have been everything.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
I still have a bunch of questions. So, okay, we know there's conventions. You haven't been to the one yet, but like, have you met up with other Garfield friends, like from the internet, or just like other Garfield super fans before?
Do Garfield fans have a name as well?
Oh yeah,
I think Little Lasagnas is the way we go. It's like he's Garfield, and we're his little lasagnas. So that's a good question. So I think that what's so like funny about Garfield fandom is that I think that everybody if they're not a Garfield fan, they're at least aware of Garfield and have some emotional reaction to Garfield. So it was mentioned up top, I'm Native American. I'm an enrolled member of a tribe based out of Southern Washington State. And I went to an event that my tribe put on at a really nice hotel casino just north of Portland a few weeks ago. And elders, prominent members of my tribe walked up to me at the event. And the first thing they said to me was, "Oh, it's great to meet you. I heard you had a little run-in with Garfield." and then it's like, "I like him too." And then they would like show me their Garfield wallet or something, Yeah. So it's just if he feels like a character that there are times when I'm in cool Hollywood parties and I'll like be wearing a Garfield t-shirt and somebody will show me their Garfield socks or something. It feels like we're in like an Illuminati type situation where it's like, it's like a secret cult, but like we're all in it.
Okay, I have
your little lasagnas.
Sonic Sonic Garfield.
Are you one of the and friends?
This is another one of my
and friends.
Right.
God, I wish. I hope
you were stranded in U.S. acres for years, just living off the land.
That is how I refer to my time where I was more of an ironic Garfield fan. Is like those were my U.S. acres years.
Okay.
I did just want to say on that I had a similar thing with Sonic in the 2010s, and I think Sonic as a brand itself went through a similar thing of just having what some fans call the meta era, where it was like self-reflective kind of semi-ironic or outright ironic jokes on social media and in Sonic Boom, both of which I think were very funny and the right move at the time because the franchise had such a sort of damaged reputation, and a little bit of self-effacing humor I think helped win back some affection.
I think that the fall of Sega as being their own console brand also probably affects that, because it does feel like there were a few years of this of Sonic as a brand having name value, but they were no longer like the number one IP of like the Sega Genesis or the Sega Dreamcast or whatever. And you saw stuff like Sonic and Mario at the Olympics, where it's just like, oh, you're kind of like cashing in on the awareness of this character, but it kind of felt like rudderless as a brand a little bit. And I feel like recently, especially with like the Sonic movies, which like, I would love to hear y'all's opinions on those, but it feels like that is kind of riding the ship of people being like, yeah, Sonic the Hedgehog rules,
I think it was a huge turning point, that first movie. And specifically, I think the redesign. I think everybody reacting to ugly Sonic was like it was sort of, I don't want to, okay, I will equate it to this because Jesus. Why not? It's all fictional. Yeah. It's like the end of Avengers Endgame, where it's like you think you're on your own against Thanos, but then the portals start opening up and all of the other people who like had your back the whole time were like, yeah, that is ugly. That is a really ugly Sonic. And then they were like, give the Sonic fans what they want. And then the Sonic fans were like, we want Tyson Hesse to redesign Sonic. And then that's what happened. And then the movie was good. And then that combined with Sonic Mania in 2017, other strong Sonic products helped, I think, the overall franchise get into, probably the most popular state it's ever been in now.
Yeah, so I never really thought about it like that, but that does feel like it's really interesting in that, like when the first Sonic redesign came out and the internet was like very appalled at his weird teeth or whatever, it really felt like, oh, these people like give a shit about Sonic. Like if they didn't give a shit, they wouldn't be like threatening to set themselves on fire outside of like the Sega headquarters to get a better designed Sonic the Hedgehog or whatever. And it feels like it really feels like, like that, I think, galvanized the fan base. And the movie came out with like the great redesigned Sonic and people like showed up for it. Like it 100%. Was a big hit and it was like, oh, you redesigned Sonic and the movie's great, and it feels like that did. Cause I do feel like I've seen since then, like people being more passionate about their Sonic fandom in a way that's just like cool, cause he is a character that like was so central to so many of our experiences in the 90s as gamers,
It's interesting. It does feel like a cultural shift in a larger way than just Sonic and Garfield. It does feel like there is sort of a
just those trend two things.
Away from a sort of like complicated relationship with irony to more of just like, I'm tired, I like this.
Yeah.
Like people are just dropping the sort of thing. You don't hear guilty pleasure as much, I feel like. People are just like, I'm obsessed with, and then they'll say the stupidest thing you've ever heard of.
Right. We just got rid of the guilty part.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This is a pleasure. And you shake hands. Have a kiss, right?
Yeah. Just like Garfield and Sonic before they had their Garfield and Sonic baby.
Well, they got a kiss before they have the baby. You can't do that after.
And if you think about it, they're kind of a perfect couple because Garfield likes to go slow and Sonic got to go fast. So together they go medium.
Right. They each have their own, dedicated food item.
Chili dogs.
Yeah.
John is kind of like Eggman.
Sure. Yeah. Right. I was gonna, because you've mentioned lasagna a couple times already. That you went to Olive Garden. You had more lasagna in Hollywood. Where Hollywood Land, whatever it's called.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So like, did you know what lasagna was before Garfield? Or was Garfield like, oh, he seems to really enjoy lasagna, I have to now eat it?
I think that's what it's become in my adult life. Yes. Like when I eat, like there are not times, I don't think in the past 10 years a time where I've sat down and said, I would like a nice lasagna. And that's not in some way motivated by Garfield. In the same way that I'm sure that if y'all ever go to a baseball game and you're ordering a hot dog, you're probably, if you order a chili dog, you're doing this because that blue wonder makes you want it,
Yeah. I just wish for them to like have additional favorite foods. Like I love to lean on the trivia that Tails likes mint candy. Therefore he must like mint ice cream. I like mint ice cream. I'm Tails. And Knuckles likes grapes. I like grapes. I'm also Knuckles. And I like chili dogs too, but I need a nap afterwards.
Chili dogs are the best.
Sonic goes running.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I grew up in Michigan, and in Michigan there are places called Coney Islands, which is not related to Coney Island in New York. And you go there just to eat a chili dog. That's what they serve, chili dogs and patty melts. So like it was part of the culture in which I grew up. So it made sense to me. Of course, Sonic would love a thing that's around me all the time. Just like I was
Did
also
you ever go to Tony Paco's in Toledo? That's not in Michigan. That's south in Ohio.
Yeah,
but we in Ohio would go to Coney Island. So I'm just wondering if it went both ways.
Well, in Michigan, we would make fun of Toledo all the time.
Holy shit!
Right, even though
monster.
Right, it's because I think we were just upset because once upon a time, Michigan and Ohio almost went to war over Toledo. They both wanted Toledo. Yeah.
Oh, they were like, you take it. No, you take it. Oh.
Right. But the
it was kind of like the standoff at the Motel 6. It was just like a little bit of like edging of like, who's got
the Toledo tattoo?
It's like none of us wanted to be rude, but it felt like if any of us was like more of an alpha jerk, it's like, we were all trying to be nice while also desperately wanting to sleep. Using a Garfield comforter at a Motel 6,
That's also such a funny, like, it's life being reduced to like a 3-panel strip. It's like such a funny, cartoonish, escalated situation you're in. Like you could easily like just take that and map that out into like sketch beats.
I definitely want to make a feature about this.
No, there's like somebody's throwing a punch. It's a freeze frame, and then it's like record scratch. You're probably wondering how I got into this situation.
Oh yeah. I mean, that was going through my mind while I was standing at the Motel 6 counter. Is just like I made a lot of real specific life choices to be in this Motel 6 lobby at 11 p.m. at night on a Saturday with my girlfriend wearing like a knockoff Garfield T-shirt with "Fuck Mondays" on it written in Old English, having a standoff with somebody with Garfield arm tattoos over a Garfield hotel.
Who may or may not be carrying a combat knife. Don't know.
Right. With the Garfield handle.
With hate normal carved on it in...
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So something that you said earlier about themed foods. Honestly, there's a bit of controversy around the Garfield movie that has been brought up a lot in sort of conversations about this Garfield room, in that the movie makes a sincere push to diversify Garfield away from lasagna, which I know shocking. Everybody, pick your jaws up. So now they've broadened him out to enjoying Italian food. So he likes lasagna, of course, but also pizza, cheese, things like that. And because of that, the Garfield room is not covered in like lasagna pillows or something like that. It's covered in like blankets with pizza patterns on them, and like the pillows on the beds were shaped like raviolis and stuff like that. Which, I totally get it. I get the controversy, but I also get the reason to do it, because I feel like a good deep dish pizza and a good lasagna are kind of the same thing,
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And they, but that, I remember seeing the first trailer for the new movie and it revealing a bit of the Garfield origin, how he meets John, which is he's at an Italian restaurant. So he is he's eating, but that's actually not an invention of this movie, right? That's like part of the Garfield lore.
No, so this is why, like, the first time that I saw that trailer, did I cry? Yes. And I think that one reason that I thought it was so cool, and one reason that I like appreciate the new Garfield movie so much, is that it felt like they like gave a shit about Garfield canon, And so the original origin story of how Garfield and John met is that John was working in an Italian restaurant, and he was like in the alley behind the restaurant, and he saw this kitten and he fed the kitten some lasagna, and he adopted Garfield off of that. The movie slightly reframed that, where instead of working at the restaurant, John's like a customer at the restaurant. But it still just does this beautiful thing of like, it explains why Garfield loves lasagna in this way that's like touching and like tear inducing, of like, Garfield's just this little hungry kitten, and lasagna is like the first meal that made Garfield as a kitten feel like warm and whole, given to him by John, and it's like, oh, it's like beautiful that Garfield loves lasagna, because it reminds him of like when he was a kitten and he didn't think that anybody loved him, and this person took him in and fed him something that made him feel full and happy, So,
yeah,
Oscar buzz for the Garfield movie? I think so.
I love that. I love that. And yeah, that was a big part of the Sonic movie too, is like seeing the characters that previously did not have, like Sonic had a third dimension to his personality. He was lonely, and he and Eggman had parallels in terms of their approaches to their situations that mirrored them. And it was cool and thoughtful, and it was respectful to the games while also being inventive as it should be in its own right, because it's its own thing. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And it's cool just to share it. It's just, I'm sure you felt this way as well. Just like, you're mentioning of like seeing people with like a shirt or something, but like it is fun to just have like this positive touchstone thing, a commonality. Basically, there's no third spaces anymore. So how the hell are you gonna like meet a person? You got to have some sort of in between thing, and so Sonic Garfield can be sort of those things.
Oh, I never really thought about it like that, but that honestly makes a lot of sense. Of like, for you, like Sonic is your third space. So if you're like, out in public and you see somebody wearing a cool Sonic t-shirt, you're going to say cool Sonic t-shirt. And
they're going to say, don't talk to my son.
Right. There is always that weird moment, like when you're out shopping and you're like, oh, that's a Sonic shirt. Oh, it's on a child. I can't. Like, it's a very small. I can't go over and be like, I know Sonic.
Be like, excuse me, middle-aged man here. I also gotta go fast.
So, I'll use this opportunity to tell my Sonic Garfield crossover story, which is I never really met up with a Sonic fan. Like, it was, Sonic super fan in the 90s, turned away from the franchise, yada, yada, yada. But then, so I was working, new job, and this other guy started like shortly after me. And then like after a couple of weeks, he made some reference to like something about me that he shouldn't have known, because like we haven't known each other that long. I was like, well,
hang
on.
An awful lot like Idris Elba. And you're like, yes.
And I was like, wait, how did you know that? And he's like, well, I kind of know about you. I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, Sonic forums. I was like, oh, you read Sonic forums? And he's like, yeah. And you posted under your real name from age 11 to 20.
So that person tried to murder you, right? They're wearing your skin now.
Right. He pulled out the Sonic themed knife. It was like, here we go. It's time.
He was like, gotta go fast.
Usually I spend a lot of my time alone at Motel 6s, but that's don't listen to what they say. That bed can fit two.
Anyway, so I'm like, oh boy, should I be embarrassed about this? And I was like, no, I can embrace the fact that I posted under my real name as a Sonic fan. And I was like, well, okay, hang on, who are you? And he's like, no, I can't reveal my pseudonym. And so, okay, I go back to the archives. I'm combing through. I'm trying to figure it out. And he's like, I was mostly a lurker anyway. And so I find his one post. You know what his one post was about? It was about Garfield and how he likes Garfield, and he thinks that people who don't like Garfield really need to take another look at it. And, it's better than people think. And it is his only topic.
Wow.
So first off, Bo, I have to say it's very weird that you're talking about me in the third person like this.
Yeah, it's weird that we worked together for like several years.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the interesting thing about fandoms is, like, I'm a big professional wrestling fan, and I remember I was writing on a Shrek Rise and Go 90s series for DreamWorks. And my boss for the series, really nice guy, but it's a comedy writing job where you're there for like 3 weeks or something like that. And I remember pitching like a web series episode that was sort of about pro wrestling, that was really just my opportunity to cram in as many pro wrestling in jokes as possible into the episode. Having Shrek say like Shrek 316 says, I just swamped your butt or something like that, And the jokes I assure you were not as good as that. That was that. And so I wrote this, I pitched the script to my boss, and, he said like, oh, it sounds good. And then I sent him the draft, and then he came back to give us notes on it. And I was just like, hey, just so you know, a lot of the stuff in it's kind of like, pro wrestling, deep nerd in joke stuff. And then he was like, oh, I know. And then I was like, wait, what? You're a wrestling fan? And then he was like, yeah. And then he like took me over to his desk where he had a shrine to like obscure Japanese pro wrestling from the 90s. And there's like a secret handshake that wrestling fans do. And he was just like, hell yeah, brother, too sweet me. And then we did like a too sweet, which is a pro wrestling gesture. And then it's like, oh, now I'm like lifetime friends with that guy, you know? Because it's like he was telling me like, oh, he didn't really have anybody else at DreamWorks that loved pro wrestling. And like, you know, but then you also get situations where it's like you know, reveal your fandom to somebody in a public space, and then you find out that they have like, you know, like a knife with like Sonic and Knuckles written on it, and they're just like,
sure.
And then they're like, thirst for blood or whatever, you know.
Yeah, I don't think it's probably not a Shrek knife, right? I feel like.
Oh, you'd be surprised.
I don't know. The Shrek heads, do they like to tussle?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh yeah, there's for sure multiple Shrek knives that I'm seeing. Yeah, there's one where the blade is green. There's one where the handle is green. There's a Shrek knife holder where Shrek's like holding up the knife like this.
Okay.
That's clever.
Here's a good question: Are there more like Shrek bongs or Garfield bongs that exist? Because I feel like there'd be a lot of crossover there.
I just googled Garfield bong, and I'm delighted in the search results.
Oh, wow.
Do I remember what? Do I remember the Sonic hotel room? No.
What? Oh,
We talked a lot about. I was gonna ask. Was this the first Garfield themed hotel room, or were there previous Garfield hotels that you know of in the history of Garfield world?
So I think that so I'm going to say that, you know, is there like a weird Garfield tie-in hotel in some small hotel in Muncie, Indiana? Maybe, you know, but as far as like promoted brand tie-ins, I feel like this was the first, and I feel really fortunate. I learned this while I was getting selfies in the Motel 6 LAX room, is that was actually the room that they shot the commercials in. So it had been there since, for months, since the movie, you know, like long before the movie came out. So there's a chance that you could have just booked a room at this Motel 6 and just stayed in a Garfield suite having no idea. And then the room that I stayed in the Motel 6 in Hollywood was the influencer suite, the one where that you could not book, but they had like influencer stands. So it was really nice. There were like stacks of Garfield books everywhere. The walls were covered in orange fur. So, you know, I think that this might be the first Garfield. This is not the first Garfield themed room in history, but I think it's the first Garfield themed hotel with major brand association.
Okay.
And you're certainly the first opportunity that you've had in your life, because this is where you live and work and play and dream. And you have gone to Garfield at the motel. Anyway, okay, listen, let's wrap it up with last thoughts or questions from everyone.
I have to bring up something. Okay, because you've mentioned Garfield movies. Clearly, the new one you love. The Bill Murray ones are apocryphal, clearly. But I need to ask your thoughts on a little-known film called Garfield Gets Real.
Garfield Gets Real. Okay.
Yeah,
Is this the Sonic Live of Garfield?
Yeah.
So Garfield Gets Real, I cannot speak on this movie specifically, but I can speak on it, I think, in a way that I think is going to be interesting in a little bit. I think is going to be interesting in like a broad way, is that there was this weird Garfield series that came out in the late 2000s, early 2010s that I think kind of derailed Garfield fandom in a really interesting way. It really does not feel like Garfield as we know it. There are a lot of different characters that don't really exist in Garfield. There's like a lot of like, you know, like mice and spiders that are not designed how you kind of picture Jim Davis designing things like that. I want to say it was a character that existed on like, you know, Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network or something like that at the time. And my guess is that Garfield Gets Real, just looking at the character designs, was sort of like the movie that kind of launched that TV series. And the reason that it's so weird is that it was entirely made in France. And like, so they weren't necessarily, connection. Yeah, so they weren't necessarily as worried about like staying close to Garfield lore as like, you know, maybe an American-made Garfield project would be. And there are a lot of games like Garfield Kart, the Garfield Go-Kart series, that just feels like, oh, why is like lasagna not a power-up or something like that? And it's like, man, you look at, or like, who are these other characters that are like, why is like this character that I've never heard of before in Garfield lore, like a major unlockable character in it? And it's like, oh, because it's the weird, like, European Garfield series that got ported back to the United States. and it's like a copy of a copy of a copy, you know.
So they have a Chris Thorndike.
Yeah, for sure. So I've not personally seen Garfield Gets Real, but my guess is that it is part of the weird European Garfield series.
Well, I feel like you should watch it because it was written by Jim Davis.
What?
It is I think the one it is the one Garfield movie written by him. It's about Garfield. Like you said, it's the Sonic life. It's Garfield living in a world where he knows he's a comic strip character, and he goes to work with John and Odie to pose for the comic strip.
So small correction. Here Comes Garfield. Here Comes Garfield. The 1982 thing that I was telling you about was written by Jim Davis.
Oh, that was also written by Jim. Okay.
Yeah. I think
makes sense.
I think it technically had a lot of those Garfield specials were written by Jim Davis, but it feels like they also had like a co-writer that like I'm sure it's just like somebody with actual TV writing credits that was just like here's how you tell a story in not 3 panels, you know. But Jim Davis, his fingers are in Garfield projects way more than you probably think that they would be.
Right. I guess there is sort of that feeling, like, especially if you just read 30 years worth of strips, you go, okay, there's a ghostwriter here somewhere. But I guess, I mean, his name's on it. Do you have like a favorite Garfield strip? Like, are there 3 panels that speak to you more than any other Garfield work?
Oh wow, that's like picking children. So I'm trying to bring up the exact strip, but I think that my go-to is I don't remember the exact setup and punchline, but I very vividly remember. Just found it. It's I believe an 8-panel strip, and it is
Sunday funny.
Yeah. It's Garfield, first strip, shivering and saying, "Oh boy, is it chilly in the morning." Garfield walks up to a giant cup of coffee, starts splashing on himself and going splash, 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 splash. And then he sips the coffee and says sip. And then he gargles the coffee. And then he gulps the coffee. And then 5th panel, that feels so warm. And then 6th panel, he climbs into the coffee and goes, ah. And then the last panel is Garfield just like sitting in this giant cup of coffee while John is saying, "You really enjoy your coffee, don't you, Garfield?" Jim Davis, you a king.
You should print that, or you should get a print of that, hang it on the wall.
Yeah.
I'm so used to like the lasagna cat things of when I'm hearing like a Garfield thing, like you expect the like put them and then like some 80s song to start playing.
When Jim Davis, so, like, he's still writing Garfield strips.
Yeah.
So he's still, because he did sell it, right? He sold it.
He sold the TV series rights to Nickelodeon, I believe.
Okay, so he still has a controlling, like he still owns Garfield, or is it just
strips? Probably makes all the money from the calendars,
similar to the Turtles.
Yeah, I think it's so. I just know that he still has rights to the strips, and so he didn't. I'm not sure if he sold the brand outright, but it might be also like a licensing deal. But regardless, I don't know. Jim Davis is in his 70s, cash in king. You know, like
right.
Are there any Jim Davis tells in like where you can be like, oh, this one he definitely was involved
the Jim
in.
Davis original?
So that's something that's honestly really cool about the new Garfield movie is that it really felt like the Bill Murray movies did not really feel like they mapped the comedy stylings of Jim Davis. It felt like it could have been any cat and like it still would have been the same movie. Whereas the new Garfield movie, they really leaned into, like, I would say the Jim Davis oeuvre of how he sets up jokes. There are a lot of moments where Chris Pratt's Garfield looks directly to camera and will address the audience, kind of like how Garfield does in the strips. There are, just the way that things are drawn feel very Jim Davis-y as far as like, how characters move. The character designs feel very interesting in sort of a Jim Davis-y way. Like there's they meet like a bull character, like a male cow that is like an older character that one of its horns is missing and it's using that horn as like a walking stick. And it just like is a cool character design that just feels like something Jim Davis would come up with. And if you think about like Jim Davis, I feel like is somebody that's not often thought about for his like iconic character designs. But like, there's so many, like Odie being this weird dog with a long neck like a giraffe. Like dogs don't look like that. That's all in Jim Davis's noggin. Like Sheldon, the character from US Acres, who's like an egg, a chicken still inside of his shell. I think that the Garfield movie is full of a lot of just those beautiful kind of weird Jim Davis touches, character designs, the way he sets up jokes, just the style of comedy is very Garfieldy.
Gotcha.
So I have a question for all of you that apologies if this is a controversial topic. What is your stance on the Sonic the Hedgehog 1993 cartoon versus the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon, which was darker and more extreme with a hard X? Which one do you prefer? How do you feel about it? I just remember as a kid being so weirded out by there being two Sonic the Hedgehog cartoons at exactly the same time that were just completely different tones.
But the same voice actor.
Same voice actor, and we're born from the same pitch. And the same development process.
What?
They split it off in two. Yeah. Because they couldn't decide on a tone. So they were like, well, let's just go in both extremes. So Adventures was the silly one, and 93 or Sad AM was the darker one.
Right. It ties a little bit even into the real Ghostbusters, speaking of, because the guy who came up with the concept of the Saturday morning cartoon, Len Jensen, him and his writing partner Chuck Melville were the head writers on the real Ghostbusters for a long time, and Chuck Melville unfortunately passed away, so Len Jensen had to basically run solo, although he did have help from places before other writers came in. But they wanted to redo what they did with the real Ghostbusters, Deke, which was you have a Saturday morning season and you have the syndicated season airing at the same time. So it's 6 days a week, new episodes the whole time. But ABC, who wanted the Sonic show, was like, we don't want to do that. We don't want it split up. We want Sonic. And so they actually came up then with the sillier, goofier version. And they're like, what if we do a completely separate show, a completely separate tone, but you get like the higher quality, higher budget, darker, because this is also, hitting the era of Batman the Animated Series, X-Men,
right.
Like Saturday morning cartoons were evolving, and ABC went for it. And that's why they did the split and why the tones are so different. They're both great, I think, is the real answer.
I love them both as a kid. I think the Saturday morning one, the darker one, the higher production value one has aged way better. Like the goofy lower budget one looks 1,000 years old now.
I feel like how David does, which is that I love them both. And usually I do feel how Bo does. But recently I have flipped on that, and I kind of actually like the Adventures goofier one a little more.
Oh.
And the recurring characters of like Wes Weasley and stuff. It is going for a Looney Tunes thing that I previously was like sort of looking down on it as though it wasn't as good as Looney Tunes. So how dare it even try? But now I'm like, it's pretty good. The episodes are kind of long, but the Saturday morning one, the more serious one, is not perfect either. It's like it's very talky. It's a lot of characters talking about stuff that's not happening. You know what I mean? Like it's just like there's a lot of lore, and I think that's very appealing to some fans. But then the other one's just jokes, which I think I go with that one more.
I think what they both have in common and what's both awesome is Sonic turns into a actual buzzsaw, like a one-dimensional buzzsaw.
Right.
And
it's
so fucking cool.
He doesn't need to pull out a knife. He is the knife. So if Sonic was trying to get into that Garfield room, you might have lost a limb or two.
Yeah. Well, I guess that for me, I think the big touchstone for Sonic for me was the Sonic the Hedgehog comic books that felt like they were more in line with the sillier series, where it's like mostly about chili dogs and stuff like that. And like they sold them at the gas station near where my dad lived, and it's like, and they became something I really excitedly buy every week for or every month for, like probably a year or two. So I don't have them anymore, but I used to have just this big stack of Sonic the Hedgehog comics. So for me, the darker, edgier Sonic was just such a like culture shock of just like, wait, Sonic's cool?
It's funny because
it's funny if you had stuck with the comics. If you had stuck with the comics for another year, they evolved from the jokey chili dog jokes gag strips to being more inspired by the Saturday Morning and became more serialized. If you've heard the name Ken Penders, he's the one who sort of became the main author and sort of drove the comics towards that that style.
I really hope that it was a very harsh turn and it was just like one panel is silly joke and then Sonic's response was to buzzsaw like Knuckles in half with a long sword.
It essentially was, you had the penciler from Alf drawing Sonic being tried for war crimes.
Cool.
Like that, those were things that were happening.
Okay, that sounds rad. Okay, and then final question. Do we think that real Ghostbusters writer Len Jensen killed Lorenzo Music?
I don't.
I'm not hearing a no.
Yeah, I don't know.
Allegedly,
nobody can reach him for an interview, so
possible.
he might be hiding for a reason.
Yeah, just do your own research.
All right, Joey, thank you so much for your time, for guesting on the show, telling us about Garfield and sharing your passion and enthusiasm with us. The links to the various things that you've mentioned, including the essay, maybe that comic, the other things linked in the description.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm just glad we didn't record on a Monday.
That's right. We never record on a Monday, but we do release on Mondays.
Oh, no.
I know. Hey, well, for every dark cloud, there is a silver lining. So if it's Monday where you are, it means you just got through another silver lining, another episode of Sonic Weekly. Now you can go back to hating the rest of the day. But maybe before you enter that deep Monday depression, you should make sure that you're subscribed to this podcast on your podcatcher of choice, be it Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, if you only use Android devices, because it doesn't work on anything else. And you can not just subscribe, give it a rating, give it the 5 stars, write a review, tell people how much you hate Mondays and love Tuesdays. Ruby Tuesdays, which does not have a Garfield promotion.
Oh, they should.
Thing.
Oh, yeah.
Right. That's
what the hell? What the hell, Ruby Tuesday?
Throwing these out. Right. But hey, if you don't want to deal with any sort of pod catcher, you can, of course, subscribe on our YouTube channel. We put up the same episodes. The only difference being there's visuals, gameplay footage recorded by a friend of the show, Jack of Old Games. You can go ahead, subscribe, write comments there. We do look at those comments just like we always look at every email that's sent to us at sonicweeklypodcast@gmail.com. If you want to reach out to the show, we didn't get to it this week, but I think next week or the week after, we are going to open up that mailbag, dive in, read your thoughts. So, hey, if you want to be in on that, go ahead, send us an email. Send us a line, as the kids say. And if you want to get into our Discord server, also
send us a line referring to what does the line refer to in send us a line?
I don't know.
The telephone line?
Maybe?
Yeah. Anyway, sorry. I'm sorry.
It's all right. Yeah.
Sometimes I listen to the specifics.
Send us a line of chili dogs.
Whoa. Or a package of lasagna. There's some good frozen lasagna out there. If you just you don't want to get it fresh, but you can get it fresh. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm hungry.
The Olive Garden lasagna tie-in was really good.
Yeah.
Olive Garden, I feel like people talk shit, but it's great. Olive Garden's amazing.
Oh, that's good.
Is that promotion still going?
It damn well better be.
All right, good.
Is it eternal forever?
There's one near my house. So.
Oh yeah, but send us an email if you want to link to the Discord server where you can join in and talk with other like-minded Sonic the Hedgehog fans, where we don't just talk about Sonic, but we do talk a lot about Sonic, obviously. And of course, got to thank Smoovies for the edit. He's the one that makes us sound at our best.
Smoovies is not editing this one. Sorry about mentioning Smoovies.
Okay, wait, who's editing this one?
Jack of Old Games.
I'm not sure.
Probably not.
No, it's a
Jack of Old Games.
It might have to be
Jack of Old Games.
Okay. Hey, thanks,
Jack of Old Games.
for the edit.
You're welcome.
You're sitting in Smoovies' chair, and you're
That's
going to
right.
make us sound as
Yeah.
the best we can. Be all that you can be in the podcast world. I don't know.
Every second you talk is making it harder.
It's harder for you to. Okay. Well, hey. Also, thank you, Bo, for not editing this episode.
No problem.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Yeah.
And thank you, David. Thanks, David. Thanks, Joey. Thanks, everybody.
Yes.
Bye.